I see, mates. The batteries is tied into this. As we're talking about this now, I see this decade as being the decade of decentralisation. We're going to see a huge uptake in blockchain. So not just Bitcoin, and we're actually going to start seeing some valuable products being developed. We're going to see some of the internet moving more and more towards blockchain, and real life value coming from them, rather than this kind of tokeny stuff that we're really dealing with at the moment. We're also seeing the same thing happening in the energy sphere. And so something to bear in mind is the coal plants and oil is very centralized. It's very controlled around a resource sitting in one particular location, controlled by one particular company. Whereas when we're talking solar, we've got farmers in Australia who are now transferring their land from being, grazing land and putting solar farms on it. And, they're paying those things off in just a few years, nothing at all. And then they've got this solar farm sitting there generating electricity, generating them consistent income. And that's incredible. And we're seeing the same thing happen with microgrids and batteries and wind and everything else that's associated with it. Everyone's going to be able to put solar, on top of their houses, or we might get to the point that they don't even need to do that. There might be more community solar panels somewhere, or there might be one particular person who's generating so much fucking electricity that within the microgrid of your community, you're able to sustain yourselves with all the electricity that you need. And so this is huge. And so you can see that there's big incentives for certain companies to try and slow this down as much as possible.
Yeah, but even the companies that own coal-fired power stations and stuff like that huge companies have made commitments to get out of that game. Now they're like AGL and Engie and guys like that. Now they are companies that have kind of sold that as, hey, we're going green, but there's a financial reason. They spend more time than anyone studying these markets, and they know what the future is. So to me, that's a big, like, sort of, divining rod or whatever, a bit of a clear indicator of where stuff's going. I love that idea of that it's the decade of decentralization that you brought up, because it makes a huge amount of sense. And sharing the energy across the grid from generating it in a lot of different locations is pretty awesome, really. One of the big centralized, probably still centralized generation sort of ideas is still nuclear, and even fusion potentially into the future. But nuclear fission is
talk to
still
me about nuclear,
something.
Mate.
Well, I guess, after I think most of us have watched that Bill Gates documentary where he's looked into, I suppose, these new types of nuclear power plants. And there seem to be people that are inventing stuff that's on a smaller scale. And most of the old nuclear technology, most of the plants that exist are built off very old sort of designs and technologies. But there's so much regulation around the space that it actually is pretty difficult to get a new project up and running and actually get it on the ground. And the public just doesn't have the appetite for it, despite it being quite a clean way to generate
Australia
electricity.
Do you think Australia will ever have a nuclear power plant, Lockie?
Not a big one. So I think nuclear is pretty much dead as an idea, unless they can get it really, really small. And so
Yeah,
people
that's a
may
really
have
interesting take.
people may have tiny nuclear power plants on their to power certain things. You know, that may be an idea. You know, you might have one for a neighborhood or something, or even smaller. You might have one power a mine or something. I don't know. That's just my take with no evidence. It's just my gut feel of the public sentiment.
I encountered a few interesting people and articles the other day because there's kind of been a resurfacing of nuclear, and it almost seems to coincide with obviously the Gates doco as well, but obviously fusion is the it's the prize. It's the prize that awaits, and it's the prize that we potentially need to get to in order to, particularly from like a space travel perspective, etc. But also, arguably, if you're going that far into fusion, which, mind you, is in all from what I've read, is not going to be something that happens this decade. We're still a long way away from fusion. And so the next gen fission reactors that are getting spoken about also aren't here yet, in a way that is able to be built on a commercial scale, or whatever you call commercial in the space of nuclear. Industrial scale is probably the word. And so, as far as what I've read about it is, fission is dead in the water compared to renewables. But there's obviously this big gap in between that you kind of need to continue doing the R&D around it all, so that you can maybe eventually get to this fusion. And so it's quite an interesting place. But from what it sounds like, Australia certainly won't ever have nuclear. Nuclear is being pushed by certain companies and certain people to try and keep the mission going. But as far as the economics and the economics of it all stand up, it just doesn't look like a feasible option.
Fusion seems to me like something that might be more useful fusion would be awesome, but it seems to me to have more of like a space application.